I'm attorney Sina Rezvanpour, and this is the ultimate guide to personal injury. Whether you're one of my clients or not, this video will give you a basic understanding of all things personal injury, like case value, negotiation, medical treatment, and much, much more. You can either enjoy the whole video start to finish, or you can click on one of the chapter bookmarks below if you're looking for a specific topic. If you have a question and it wasn't answered in the video, leave it in a comment below. Also check out the description section. There'll be a link to a blog post that I'll continually update with answers to questions as they come in. Now let's get started. Let's take it from the very top, the scene of the accident. I'll use a car accident as an example to talk us through, but you'll see that a lot of these concepts are going to apply to other types of personal injuries like dog bites or slip and falls. The general principle is that you want to make sure that you're safe, that you're okay. You want to then collect as much evidence as you can, and then you want to think about getting medical treatment. So I'll break down collecting evidence into 6 easy steps. Step number 1 is calling the police. The police showing up benefits you in a number of ways. They will help to collect and exchange information, get witness statements, maybe take photos or measurements, also help to diffuse the situation if it's getting confrontational and there's strong personalities involved. And it's actually incredibly important to get a police report within 24 hours if you're involved in a hit and run or an accident with someone who has no insurance. Step number 2 is taking photos. So you want to take photos of the vehicles involved in a car accident. You want to take photos of the damage to those vehicles, where they came to rest if you can. If the car's already moved, that's fine. You want to also take photos of visible injuries. So a lot of times injuries are not visible. Maybe they're aches and pains. Maybe they don't even show up until days later. But to the extent there's any bleeding, for example, or an abrasion or a bump or a bruise, you want to take photos of that as early as you can. Step number 3 is collecting the other party's information. So again, if the police show up, they'll help to do this, but if they don't, you want to take photos of the other driver's license, insurance card, and registration, possibly their license plate. Especially if it's a hit and run, you want to try to take a picture of the car or the license plate before they flee. Step number 4 is collecting whatever physical evidence you can. In an auto accident, this might not really apply. It would be the cars that are involved. We already talked about taking photos of the damage. But let's say it's a slip and fall and someone slips and falls in a grocery store on a cherry. Believe it or not, I've had this case. It later became a dispute on whether they slipped and fell on a cherry or a grape. It actually didn't end up mattering, but documenting what it is that you fell on or possibly saving it could help to avoid a huge battle later on, and it'll help experts analyze what happened to you to give their opinion. Step number 5 is collecting whatever witness contact information you can. So a witness does you no good if you cannot later contact them or have somebody else contact them to get a statement from them. So you want to make sure that you at least get their name, phone number, and possibly an email address if you can. If the police show up, they'll make sure to get a statement and all that contact information for you. Step number 6 is possibly one of the ones that's least talked about, and it's to scan the area for cameras. If there's later a dispute on what exactly happened, video surveillance is the best to put that dispute to rest. Video surveillance is often recorded over after a few days or maybe a couple weeks, so it's incredibly important that we identify the existence or location of those cameras as early as we can. Now that we've gotten evidence out of the way, we need to focus on your injuries and your medical treatment. So it is in your best interest to get medical treatment as soon as you can. That includes the same day as the accident. So you should keep in mind whether it would benefit you to go to the urgent care or possibly the ER. Medical treatment early on serves 2 main purposes. Number 1 is that it helps to rule out any major injuries like a concussion or a brain injury. And it also helps to get you certain referrals for what doctors you should see next. The second main purpose of same-day medical treatment is that it starts documenting your physical injuries in your medical records right away. This helps a lot when it comes time to negotiate with the insurance company. Insurance companies love to point out if there's a large gap between the date of the injury and the first day of treatment. So let's say 2, 3, 4 weeks go by, you can guarantee that's going to be something that's going to come up in the negotiations. So by going to treatment early on, maybe even the same day, you help to eliminate that argument right off the bat. Now that you've left the scene of the accident, you have possibly gotten treatment for your injuries, you can start thinking about now opening up an insurance claim. As a side note, most people who hire me have already opened up their claim, but if you haven't already, it's something that a personal injury attorney will gladly do for you. So this could be a good time to start thinking about whether you should hire an attorney or not. In a later part of this video, I give my opinion on why you should almost always hire an attorney, and I also talk about the few exceptions on when maybe you should not. In an auto accident, there are two types of claims that you can open. One with your own insurance, we call that a first-party claim, and one with the other party's insurance. We'll call that a third-party claim. When speaking to a third-party insurance company, you really have to be careful in what you're saying. It's one of those situations where everything you say can and will be used against you. Their whole goal is to limit the value of your claim. So you want to be careful in how you answer questions. For example, if they ask you if you're injured, you should definitely say yes, assuming that's true. And you should also not go into detail about what your injuries are. You can always answer that, or an attorney can always answer that for you at a later stage once you better understand what's happened to you. Regardless of whether you're making a first party or third party claim, you want to keep your answers short and simple. You want to give the least amount of information while still accurately portraying what happened to you. If your own insurance, your first party insurance, asks you for a recorded statement, you do have to cooperate, but you never have to do so with the third party insurance company. And no matter who asks you, no matter how much they swear that it's true, you do not have to give your social security number. Once your claim is open, you'll be given a claim number. That claim number is going to be different whether it's from one insurance company or another. So you'll want to make sure that you save that somewhere. You'll also want to save the contact information for the claims handler, often called the adjuster, on your claim. Now that your claim is open, we can focus on your car. So your car is either going to be repairable or it's going to be declared a total loss. A lawyer can help in this situation because they will help to communicate between the body shop and the insurance company and you. And if your car is declared a total loss, they'll make sure that you get every penny that you're owed under the law. But if you decide to handle it on your own, here are some things to keep in mind. If you have collision coverage, I tend to suggest that you should go through your own insurance company for the repairs. If you go through your own insurance company, yes, you have to pay your deductible, but once it's determined that you were not at fault, you will get your deductible refunded. Another benefit is that your insurance company is going to treat you a little bit better than some other insurance company that you have no relationship with. Once your vehicle is under repair, you can choose to get a rental. I usually suggest getting something modest, getting something that's definitely not more expensive than your own car. If you choose not to get a rental at all, maybe you have another car in the household, then you are entitled to what's called loss of use damages. So loss of use essentially, more or less, is the rental value of your car per day. If your vehicle is determined to be a total loss, then you are entitled to the fair market value of the vehicle had it not been in the accident, plus tax. So the way the insurance company comes up with this value is they look at comparable vehicles within your area, more or less the same miles, more or less the same options, and they average out the value of those vehicles. If you feel like you're being shortchanged, then you can counter. You can provide them with other comparable vehicles that you think more accurately reflect the fair market value. A final note on getting your car repaired, you have a choice in what body shop you take it to. So some people will choose to go with a place that's recommended and approved by their insurance company, and typically that work is guaranteed. Other times people may choose a body shop that they've used in the past or that they feel like is more independent and separated from the insurance company. Now let's dive deeper into hiring a lawyer. I'm going to give you the three main ways that we add value and one exception on when maybe you should reconsider whether to hire a lawyer or not. And then I'll help talk you through the process of hiring someone and choosing the right person for you. The absolute simplest way to put it is that if you hire a lawyer, you will almost always net more money. So it's easy for us to get the settlement up, but we can also make sure that what ends up in your pocket is higher than what you would get if you did not have a lawyer. Sometimes people will ask me, well, if my case with a lawyer could be worth maybe $50,000, why can't I, without a lawyer, go get that money? You have to be prepared to say, pay me X, and if you don't, these will be the consequences. The consequences typically involve filing a lawsuit or possibly going to trial and getting a verdict that's higher than that number. But they know that you as a layperson are not capable of effectively doing that. I'm always shocked when people don't know this, but personal injury attorneys work on a contingency basis, meaning that they recover a percentage, a previously agreed upon percentage of your total recovery or total settlement. Usually that percentage is somewhere in the range of a third, so 33 1/3%, or it can go up to 40 or 45% depending on the level of work or the stage of your case. So oftentimes you'll see a graduating scale. The benefits of a contingency fee are that you don't have to pay anything out of pocket and that you and the attorney have similar interests. You're on the same team trying to maximize the value of your case. A third and often overlooked advantage of having an attorney is that an attorney can help to quarterback your medical treatment. So what I mean by that is if you don't have health insurance or if you don't love your health insurance, an attorney can help to establish relationships with different doctors that you need for those doctors to still treat you without charging you out of pocket. They do this on what we call a lien basis. That means that they will still treat you, they will still generate a bill, but they understand that their bill will be paid at the conclusion of your case when that money comes in. Most doctors or medical facilities that are willing to work on a lien basis with an attorney are not willing to do the same with someone who does not have an attorney. That's because they know that the attorney will do what they can to make sure that the case settles and that there's money for everyone to be paid. A bonus benefit of having an attorney is that they can call your medical providers once your case is settled and try their best to reduce your medical expenses. We often see reductions in the range of 30 to maybe even 50% in some cases. By reducing your medical expenses, we are directly increasing your net settlement. I mentioned earlier that there's a very rare circumstance where you might not actually benefit from having a lawyer. And that circumstance is if your injury is very serious, but the insurance coverage is very low. So if you, for example, have a $100,000 injury, but the insurance is only $15,000, then there's a chance that the insurance company may just pay that to you without an attorney. I say there's a chance because you typically still need someone pressuring them to do so. The only problem is you don't have a right to know what the other party's insurance coverage limit is. So you actually don't know whether they have plenty of insurance to compensate you for your loss or not nearly enough. If you choose to hire a lawyer, it's so important that you trust each other. So if you're getting bad vibes during the consultation phase, just run in the other direction. It will only get worse as your case progresses. Check online for reviews, read through the reviews, but more importantly, check the state bar's website. You can type the attorney's name in and see if they have any reported disciplinary action. That means that they actually got in trouble to the degree that the bar actually chose to report that incident. Ask who specifically is going to be working on your case. I'm going to tell you a little insider secret. If you see a person's face, a lawyer's face on a billboard, there is no chance in hell that they are working on your case. So you want to know whether your case is going to be managed by an attorney, or maybe a paralegal, or maybe a case manager that never went to law school, or maybe a combination of those. Ask questions like, what's the timeline for your case? What are the different stages of a case? There are some questions that are very hard to answer at an early stage, like what is the value of my case? But what I like to do is I explain to the potential client what is like the mechanism or how do we actually come up with case value? What affects it positively, what affects it negatively, and what's a very general range that this person can expect. Your medical treatment is incredibly important. It's what pushes you along on your road to recovery. But it's also very important to your case and the value of your case. The idea being the more injured someone is, the more medical treatment they need. And the more injured someone is, the more valuable their case. So more medical treatment often leads to more case value. Let's say two identical twins get into the exact same accident and they suffer the exact same injuries. Twin number one doesn't get any treatment. They just wait for their injuries to resolve on their own. While twin number two goes to the emergency room, follows through with the recommendations of the emergency room doctor, goes and maybe sees a physical therapist or a chiropractor, eventually an orthopedist, possibly gets some MRIs. Twin number two has a way more valuable case because they now have a stack of medical records that become the evidence to support their case value. But what if you don't have medical insurance? Or what if your insurance is not so great and you have a lot of copays? Well, there is another option, and that's getting treatment on a lien basis. Many doctors or medical facilities that are accustomed to seeing patients who were involved in personal injury accidents understand that the patients often don't have the money to pay them right now. So what they do is they set up a lien with the attorney and the patient where everybody promises to pay the doctor, pay the medical facility at the conclusion of the case. That's once the settlement money comes in. So by doing this, by getting treatment on a lien, you often have access to additional treatment providers or access to a doctor in the first place, and you don't have to wait for long appointment times. You don't have to jump through a bunch of bureaucratic hoops before getting seen by a medical professional. A word of caution: do your very best to avoid a gap in treatment. As I mentioned earlier in this video, and an example of a gap in treatment is waiting too long to actually start your treatment. But another example is missing a series of appointments in the middle of your treatment. An insurance company will look at this and say, how injured could this person be if they could afford to skip treatment for a while? If they were really hurt, they would have stayed consistent. Now, you and I both know that that's not necessarily true. Life does get in the way, but do your very best to avoid a gap if you can. Every personal injury client is dying to know how much their case is worth. It's a natural question, but it's also a harder one to answer precisely early on in your case. It's worthwhile to go through the different factors that an attorney or an insurance company is going to consider when determining your case value, what can drive it up and what can push it down. As we mentioned earlier in our medical treatment section, your medical treatment is a huge factor in your case value. The more serious your diagnoses, the more consistent your medical treatment, and the higher your medical expenses typically all lead to an increased case value. On the other hand, infrequent or no medical treatment is always going to drive your case value down. We can't just pull a number out of thin air in the negotiation. We need to have evidence to support our position. So the most common types of evidence that we use are medical records, medical bills, but if there are additional things like video surveillance, photos of visible injuries, photos of the damage to the vehicles involved, or witness statements, these are all things that can also help drive case value up. Liability is a legal term we use to describe who was at fault for the accident. So most people commonly think of one person being entirely or 100% at fault and the other being completely fault-free. But that's not always the case. Sometimes there is a he said, she said incident, or maybe both people contributed to the accident and the liability determination is 50-50. That means that if your injury was a $100,000 injury, but you're 50% at fault, then your case value is actually 50% of that, so $50,000. Your case value, or what we call your damages, fall into two separate categories. The first would be special or specific damages. The second would be general damages. Special or specific damages are things that are precise, things that you can actually calculate with the formula. Things like your medical expenses or your lost wages. General damages are things that don't have a formula, that are a little bit harder to calculate. Those are things like your pain and suffering. Pain and suffering, also known as general damages, is actually the largest category of value that we're able to collect for our clients. Pain and suffering is just that, the pain, the suffering, the inconvenience, the stress, the anxiety that you've gone through in the past and that you will go through in the future as a result of the injuries you suffered in your accident. There is a specific jury instruction in California that says there is no precise way, there is no formula on calculating pain and suffering value. But what we usually see in practice is that your pain and suffering value is somewhere in the range of 1 to 5 times your medical expenses. The heart of every case is the negotiation, but if you're not represented by an attorney, it's incredibly important to know that you should not negotiate too early. If the insurance company is offering you a settlement within the first few weeks of your injury, just know that that is a tactic meant to entice you to accept a settlement, close out your case forever, before you've had a chance to speak to an attorney, before you've had a chance to start or even finish your medical treatment. An experienced attorney will almost never negotiate the value of your case until your medical treatment is done or nearly done. That's because we want to wait to see what all the diagnoses are, wait to see what all your medical expenses are before we start talking numbers. So in our average personal injury case, first comes the medical treatment phase, and then it's followed by the negotiation. The large majority of cases settle in the negotiation phase, but sometimes the two sides have completely different perspectives of what happened and what the case value is, so we're not able to bridge that final gap. In those situations, we typically recommend to our clients that we consider the filing of a lawsuit. A lawsuit is great for a lot of reasons. It typically increases case value, but it also has a lot of burdens. It increases case costs. Those are expenses that you eventually end up paying for. Lawsuits also really slow down the process. If we're lucky and the negotiations continue during the lawsuit, sometimes the case can settle within just a couple of months, but if it doesn't, it can take a couple of years. One thing to note is just because a lawsuit is filed does not mean that your case is going to end up in front of a jury. I would say somewhere in the range of 80 to 90% of cases settle before it ever ends up in front of a jury. If you're trying to negotiate your case on your own, here are a few tips. Number one, you catch more flies with honey. So don't just start out by being an asshole. Save that for later. If you can, be polite, be professional. That typically will get you a lot further. Number two is to make sure to confirm all verbal offers in writing. A lot of times you will be talking with the insurance company. They may offer you something over the phone, and then later they're going to backtrack. So what you can do to prevent that is send them a confirming email that summarizes what was discussed on the phone and memorializes the offer that they gave you. The third and final tip is to make sure that you ask for more than what you're okay with accepting. That's how the song and dance works with the insurance company. They're never going to start by offering you their best number, and neither should you. If we just can't bridge the gap in the negotiation, sometimes you have to file a lawsuit. The benefits of a lawsuit are that it typically increases your case value, but the downside is that you now have to jump through several hoops. The major burdens of a lawsuit on our client are all related to the discovery process of a case. Discovery is the exchange of information between the two sides. So that exchange of information can be in writing, in written discovery requests. It can be in person at a deposition, or it can also be in person at a medical examination. So I'll briefly dive into each of those to give you an idea of what to expect. The discovery process typically starts with written discovery. So each side is allowed to ask each other questions in writing. Your attorneys can answer many of those questions on their own based on information they have in your file, but usually we set up an appointment with our clients to come in person so that we can go through these questions more quickly. After we exchange our written responses, the next phase is typically depositions. So the attorney for the other side will get to sit down with you in a room. Your attorney will accompany you. There will be a court reporter, and they will go through a lot of those questions that you answered in written discovery, as well as many new questions. So if you have a great case, if you're very comfortable speaking with others, if you're presentable, the deposition can actually be a way to really add value to your case. On the other hand, if you get nervous very easily, or if you're trying to hide something, the deposition is probably going to hurt you. Following your deposition, in California, we typically see the defense set what we call a defense medical examination. Essentially, the defense is allowed to hire their own doctor to give their opinion on you and your injuries. The medical examination is non-invasive. There's typically no x-rays or MRIs, no poking or prodding, and you don't have to change your clothes. Other than those three steps, pretty much everything else falls on the shoulders of your attorney. So my best advice is stay patient, because it can take a long time, and hopefully that long process is what's going to get you a settlement that you're ultimately very happy with. The most important type of coverage that I recommend for my clients to avoid any future headache is to make sure they have uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage. Those two are essentially the same thing, but they just apply in different situations. By having this type of coverage, you avoid three extremely unfortunate circumstances that happen all the time. The first being if you're involved in a hit and run. The second being if the person actually sticks around but doesn't have insurance or doesn't have active insurance. The third being if the person sticks around, does have insurance, but your injuries are so significant that their insurance is not enough to compensate you adequately. Uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage basically fills the shoes of this other person that caused your accident. And by law, at least in California, by using this insurance coverage, it cannot affect your premiums. The best news is this type of coverage is not expensive to add. So I recommend you call, get a quote, see how much it is to add to your coverage. I would be shocked if it's anything significant, and it is always, always, always incredibly worth it. And that is the ultimate guide to personal injury. If you have any questions that are still unanswered, leave them in the comment section. And if you're in California and you'd like to set up a free consultation, there's a link in the description. Before you rely on any of my statements in this video, I strongly suggest that you consult with a local attorney in your area that's experienced in personal injury.